bring YouTube into the digital domain, the electronic handshake, where multiple worlds all combine and become one. Hey, what's happening? It's Robert Phoenix, and you are watching Sunday Night Live, Sunday Night Astro Live. Yes, I'm here, and I had to get here. I had a lot to do to get here. So let's see who else has gotten here, and I'll check in with the chat room. The purple one is in the house. What's going on, purple one? Pardon me while I drink my beverage of choice tonight. I should do a commercial. Mountain Valley Sparkling Spring Water. It's my water of choice. When I do my show on Sunday nights and I talk about astrology, I love to drink this fresh sparkling water, which is bottled in the Ouachita Mountains in the United States of America. This is American water, and it's making Americans great again when we drink the water. It's real simple. All you got to do is drink it. And when you drink it, guess what? You don't drink your own fluoridated water. That's right. Oh, and look who's here. Even Jasper likes the water. As Mountain Valley Sparkling Water, the official water of Robert Phoenix and the 11th House Sunday Night Astro Live. How was that? I could have done a more highbrow version of that, but it just came out. Oh, hey, we got to play the song. Oh yeah, you know it. He says, yeah, I got to hear my song. You're damn right. You got to hear your song. That's right. We're gonna crank it up. Hold on one second. It's right here. The only cat on the internet with his own astrological song. Now, there may be tarot cats. There are other cats that, have their own thing, right? But nobody, and I mean nobody, has this.
Jasper, the astrological cat. Look up your chart and show you right where you're at. It's Jasper, the astrological cat.
All right. It's Jasper, the astrological cat. Look at those eyes. He's staring right into your collective soul. What's happening? What is going on, everybody? It is the 3rd of November. And guess what? Seattle is still here. Seattle is still here. And the way that the Tampa Bay Buccaneers played with a very close loss, I'm not saying that they should have hoped for some kind of annihilation. They played well. If they played very poorly, then perhaps they may have wanted a different reality. But Seattle is still standing. And people kept asking me, "What do you think is going to happen?" I think we busted their game. Their game got busted. What was really interesting is that that Alpha 1, the November 3rd Alpha 1 ship, which is the ship that was christened this year by Goodyear. Like Goodyear has these 3 blimps. And that one was down at the stadium in Carson, California, where the Green Bay Packers wound up playing the San Diego Chargers. And the Green Bay Packers played about as well as a crashing Graf Zeppelin. The Green Bay Packers landed in Southern California, and they had the shit beaten out of them by the San Diego Chargers. And Aaron Rodgers, in an uncharacteristic, what's funny about Aaron Rodgers? I track him because he's a Sagittarius. So I've tracked him during his birth month, and sometimes he can be really off. And you would think that most times that you would have somebody, most times when I look at sports, like for instance, I was tracking this guy, Ryan Fitzpatrick, who plays quarterback for the Miami Dolphins, and he's a Sagittarius, and I knew he would play well today. And I was talking with Mario, who is a really interesting cat, lives out in California. And I was giving him advice on astrology and sports betting. And one of the names that I brought up to do a prop bet was Preston Williams to score more than one touchdown, and he did. He scored two touchdowns, and for to pick the Miami Dolphins and pick the over, and I was right. And I picked the Miami Dolphins in the over, and thinking that I could just ride that Sagittarian trend in a three-team parlay, I picked the Green Bay Packers and the San Diego Chargers to go over because guess what? There were two Sagittarian quarterbacks playing in that game, Philip Rivers and Aaron Rodgers. And I'm thinking expansion, expansion, expansion. Well, every now and then, I've seen this with Aaron Rodgers during Sagittarius season, although we're not quite there yet. We do have Jupiter in Sagittarius. Every now and then, Aaron Rodgers does not really play up to his standards. But by and large, during that month, sometimes he does, sometimes he knocks it out of the park. Anyway, welcome to tonight's show. Seattle is still there. The wonderful city of Carson is still there. Aaron Rodgers is probably hanging out, doing shots at the Kardashians before he heads back to Green Bay. No, I don't think that's how it works. I think they shower. I think they get on a bus. I think they hit the airport. And then they got to have a long ass ride all the way back to Wisconsin. God, I'd hate that. You go to a place, you get your butt whooped in a game, not even close. You get your butt whooped, and you got to have a long plane ride. You're going to show up in Wisconsin, or maybe they'll spend the night. I don't know what their story is. If they were smart, they'd spend the night and get up in the morning. But they usually don't. It's a savings thing, right? They're not going to pay a whole nother night of hotel rooms for the entire team and the staff and all that shit. They're not going to do that. So they're going to get back on a plane and they're going to fly through the night. They're going to show up in Wisconsin, in Green Bay, Wisconsin. They don't even. It's like where do they land? I think they land in. I wonder if they have like a private jet that flies right into like a private airport in Green Bay because it's pretty far north of Milwaukee. So it's a really interesting question. I've never contemplated that. In any case, it's going to be a long flight back, and it's going to suck. So if you're a Packers fan, sorry. We got a lot to cover tonight. Let me just check in with the chat room. Let's see who's in Chatlandia. Chatlandia sounds so civilized, doesn't it? Welcome to Chatlandia. Yes. Okay, hold on, Jasper. I need to be. Sometimes Jasper is very intense, keeping me from actually doing things. He doesn't know that, but he's very intent on that. All right, what do we got? Who do we got? We got Steve Mercer. Hey, Steve. There's Maurice. There's Judy. Seattle is standing, and Epstein did not kill himself. Yes, indeed. I think we busted that Seattle train, man. I think he got out. That's what I think. Thanks for let's see what else we have here. We've got Los Angeles Chargers. Right, Los Angeles Chargers. I always forget that too, man. Let's see. There's Carol. Hi, Carol. What's happening? Do you have one question readings? Yes, I do. I do have one question readings. Usually one question readings, you might get multiple answers, but you don't have to pay extra for the multiple answer. I think that separates me from other astrologers, that you don't have to pay for the multiple answers. So yes, I can do a question reading. So it's like about a 20-minute thing. So Jennifer, if you want to contact me for that, you can do that. I had a pretty interesting day yesterday. Was in Austin, and I gave a talk. There's an astrological society in Austin, and I've been connecting with the folks there for a while, off and on, and hadn't really met them. And a good friend Kelly from New York had connected me with them, and so we've been talking back and forth. And they set up a time for me to give a talk yesterday. So I did a whole hour and a half on the upcoming eclipses with some new stuff that I found, things that I hadn't brought into the eclipse discussion before, the major eclipses that are coming. There's a lot of eclipse action happening, starting with the one in December and going all the way through November of next year. So it's kind of a really big eclipse time. And the eclipse energy in 2020 is mostly centered around Gemini in Sagittarius, which means these are going to be mutable eclipses, with the exception of that July 4th eclipse, July 4th, July 5th, which is going to be reverting back to that kind of cardinal place where the moon is going to be in the sign of Cancer, and sorry, the moon's going to be Capricorn, and the sun's going to be in the sign of Cancer. So that's going to be a really interesting eclipse. The node's going to be at the anaretic degrees, 29 Sagittarius and 29 Gemini, and that's going to be right at the place of the birth of this country, theoretically, right in that July 4th, July 5th zone. So we took a look at that last night, and just trying to understand the nature of the eclipses like pearls on a string, and how they feed into one another and the energy accumulates. So it was a really interesting time, and it was a interesting experience for me because it got me out of my comfort zone in a lot of ways. Because I do this, and it's just me and the cat, and you guys. And then I've gone to some other places like Philadelphia, and I know those people. So I've been there, going there for years. So when I speak there, it's like speaking to a group of friends. But this was interesting, a group of strangers. I didn't know who they were. They didn't know who I was really. And they weren't probably familiar with my style of astrology or my interpretations, the cultural data points, the mundane interpretations, all that stuff. And they were really cool. We got some great questions, and apparently got a lot of good feedback. And so that was last night. And it's been a very intense and very busy time. I'm just burning the candle at both ends. We got the election coming up here, and that's going to be on Tuesday. It's a big, big day. Tuesday's a really big day for us because this is when people get to practice their informed consent and choose whether or not they want to have fluoride in their water here. And it's been real. The amount of support that we've gotten has been, I think, really tremendous. And you never know how or where support is going to come from. By the way, I just want to give a very kind of, how do I say this, loud? Not loud, but I really want to give a pronounced acknowledgement to Brian at Texas Caregivers. Brian, thank you for all your support with Clean Water Fred. Tremendous. We couldn't have done much of what we've done without you, Joan. Of course, your support from a professional standpoint has been really tremendous and supportive for myself and the group, and also some of the other things that you've contributed along the way. And Judy, I know that you're listening. Judy, thank you. You've donated a couple times. There are a few other people, from this. Natasha, I know you donated some goodies for Clean Water Fred. And if I left anybody out, I apologize. But again, this is just for me. Thank you all. It's really tremendous. And it's been a great exercise in this idea of community. And Steve and Chris and I touched upon this not slightly. I think we touched upon it in about as thorough of a way as you could in about 45 to 50 minutes on Friday. And it's just so fascinating how all these different nodes connect in with one another, and how this idea that we can be supportive of one another. And when we understand the intention, clearly understand the intention of the people that we wish to support, and our intention as well. And when we have that clarity, then we can join in if that's what we choose to do. So it's been a really instructive experience for me, and I've learned a lot, and it's broadened my horizons around this level of interactivity that we're all sharing and building together. One of the things I want to talk about tonight is I want to revisit one chart in particular, and I want to revisit a period of time again. The period of time that I'm talking about, which fits right in with Mercury retrograde, is that 1970, 71, 72 period when Neptune was in the final degrees of Scorpio and moving into Sagittarius. And this is a really fascinating time because it signals the beginning of the time of the teacher, the time of the sage, the time of the avatar, the time of the God man. And one of the people that I'm going to be looking at this lens through tonight is somebody by the name of Adi Da, who went by a number of different names, one of which was Da Frijan, Dalavananda, Baba Frijan, Adidas. So there's a whole litany of names, and he's a very interesting figure in that world. And he comes online right around the same time as people like uh, uh, Sri Bhagwan Rajneesh, Maraji. We also have Muktananda, who was very, very popular during that time and a real rising star in the realm of consciousness and Eastern philosophies. Who else was really popular in the Source family? Jim Baker from the Source family, not quite in the same sort of spectrum. But what's really interesting, connects almost all of them, is the relationship with materiality, with sex, with money, and on some level, the corrupting principle with each and every one of them as well. And of course, Charles Manson comes out of this period, and he's the dark avatar. You know, he is the dark shadow. He is the dark teacher, and has another kind of relationship with spell casting and students and followers, and again, you know, using some of the same principles that some of these other teachers were using. And what's also interesting is that Charles Manson is a Scorpio, and Adi Da, whose chart we're going to look at tonight, is also a Scorpio as well. So it was a very interesting time, and I want to look at his chart, and I'm going to show you how these cultural cycles work in terms of the individual, and where the individual will take the energy that is being initiated into a particular cultural cycle. This is a really good chart to check it out and look at. I also want to revisit Donald Trump's chart tonight. And after we did the show, or after I did the show last week, I thought about uh, what his connection was with Louis the 16th. So I decided to run their charts, and the results are quite interesting. So this is again a bit of a Mercury retrograde, looking back on last week's show, and then last week's show looking back to the French Revolution. Why don't we start with the chart of the moment tonight? Let's get into it, and I have some ideas and thoughts about this Mercury retrograde, and kind of came to me last night as I was at this lecture that I gave in Austin. So let me go over to Astro.com, grab the chart of the moment, and we shall be off and running. Give me 1 second here. How is everybody tonight? How's your Sunday? How's your weekend going? You guys having a good time? Are you managing to tread water, stay in the game, as it were? That's what it's about now, isn't it? Staying in the game. Staying in the game. All right, so what's the chart of the moment here? What do we got? Let's see. Chart of the moment. There it is. And let me, I need to just make a quick adjustment here because I was doing a bunch of charts for Washington, D.C. Yes, indeed. So, okay, here we go. While I'm doing this, right after Friday's show. And now you guys know that on Friday's show, I ran that video of that woman who is calling out Beto O'Rourke. Hey, Beto, come on, Beto, bring it. That woman, man, she kicked his ass. She kicked his ass all over the place. Anyway, Beto O'Rourke suspended his campaign. Later that day, he was like, I'm done. See ya, I'm out. So Beto O'Rourke is no longer in the running for, wait 1 second here, for the presidency of the United States of America. How about that? Wow. It's kind of mind blowing, but in some ways it's not, because that woman, whether or not they would let that video get out and make the rounds, that woman energetically took him down. I'm convinced she took him down. She took him down to Chinatown, and then he was out of the running. I don't think it's coincidental. Not at all. Not at all. I don't think they wanted that video to get out. And even if they did, I think she hit him with the psychic dim mock. You know, the dim mock, the death blow, right here, right to the heart. Bang! She got him. And Beto, I wish you all the very best. So the guy has nothing to worry about. He married. He's the husband and the father of like these three kids, and his wife is the daughter of a multi-billionaire. Beto's got nothing to worry about. Not a thing. Nada. So Beto, I hope you have a great time doing whatever you're gonna do. Skateboarders for gun control. Maybe that's what you're gonna do. But he was too hot. He was too hot for the Democrats to handle. And just goes to show you, just because you got a bunch of money doesn't always mean you're going to be a winner. All right, let's bring this up here. Okay. Let's get into this moment. Chart of the moment. Let's all take a deep breath. Let's all take a deep breath. There we go. All right, there it is. Chart of the moment. We got 22 Gemini right there in the ascendant. Look at that. 22 Gemini with the true node in Cancer getting ready to move into that first decan. I think we're going to be right in the edge of the second and first decan. So if it goes into the first decan, I got to check. I think it is first decan by Tuesday. So it's moving into the Cancerian decan, which is really good for water. Speaking of which, yeah. So here we go. Mars, of course, right there in that square to Pluto. This is the aspect that we've been tracking for a couple of weeks now. It's finally arrived, and so Seattle is still with us, and San Diego and Carson, the Los Angeles region, that's still with us as well. The square Mars is still approaching. So Monday will be a very interesting day for this Mars-Pluto square because it's really approaching, and it gets within being very, very close to exact tomorrow. In the next 48 hours after that, as Mars really begins to square off against Pluto and begins to separate and move away, this is the critical phase of this Mars-Pluto square within the next 48 to 72 hours. Okay. So from your own life, how does that apply to your own life? Well, you just got to find out where Libra is in your chart and where Pluto is transiting in your chart, or where Capricorn is, and look at that square from its angular perspective. And then you get to see where it can be volatile, explosive, confrontational. I have to watch myself because I have Mars going through my 11th house, which is social and group oriented, and Pluto's in my second house, and I can feel the energy of confrontation kind of swirling through my veins as we approach the election and what's going to happen on Tuesday. Now, tomorrow, I don't know if you caught it or not, but I kind of got into it with a guy from the city here who wanted me to take down this big, beautiful sign. Trump would love the sign. We got a big, beautiful sign. He wanted me to take it down. Right? And the story, if you weren't following, goes like this. I had this sign. It's a very nice sign. We paid good money for the sign. And I fixed it to my balcony, which is the second floor, which means that people driving by on the road on the other side of the apartment building can actually see the sign. How about that? So apparently the man from the city, not to be confused with the man from Uncle, but the man from the city came in and wanted me to take it down. He actually talked to the woman who is, she's pretty cool young gal. She's a property manager. And I got a call from her, a guy from the city. So let me talk to him. And so we got into it for a little bit, and I tried to be as polite as possible. And he said, well, it can't be over 8 feet high. And I asked him, I said, well, how do you know it's 8 feet? He said, I don't. And I said, okay, well, did you measure it? No. Well, then how do you know? And I said, well, I think you need to measure it to see if it's over 8 feet. And then he said, well, do you have a measuring tape? And I said, you're the one that needs a measuring tape because the burden of proof is on you. You're the one that's saying it's above 8 feet. So you're the one that should be measuring it, not me. So all of a sudden, when I hit that switch, boy, he went from, "Hey, I'm a nice guy, and I know if I just talk to you nicely, that you're just going to do what I say." And I didn't do that. And what I probably should have done is I probably should have said, "Look, I'm leaving this here. I'm leaving it here. I pay rent for this place, right? I pay rent for this, and it may be owned by this other entity, this larger corporation, but I pay for the space. I pay for the space. This is the United States of America, and I can have this fucking sign out here. Okay, how about that? And if you want to take it down, then you need to measure it. You need to come out here with a measuring tape. You need to prove that it's 8 feet up. And if it's 8 feet and up, then you need to take it down. I'm not going to take it down. I could have done that, but I didn't. Because, I want to be fair. I don't want to be an asshole because there's a karma thing involved. There's an energy thing involved, but I could feel this stirring up, right? So I went back to the office and, did my best to be cool, make amends. You're human. I'm human. Thanks for your service to the city or whatever, right? I mean, that's kind of where I went with this because I wanted to make sure that the energy was at least fairly balanced. But tomorrow is going to be a bit of a different story. So what I did is I got my old truck and I got a bunch of small signs for the lawn signs, and I put them on the side of the truck, and right where the bed is. And I'm going to park my truck on the curb on the sidewalk on the other side of the fence, which is from where I live, which is across the street from the elementary school. I'm going to park my truck there. I'm going to stand out there in the morning, and if he comes by there, I'm going to wave. He says, "Well, you can't park here." If he says that, well, why not? Right. So anyway, I have to be careful though, because this Mars-Pluto square in my chart, I can feel a little confrontational, and we're trying to run a very cool, clean, above board, take the high road kind of campaign here in Fredericksburg. But that's the energy that I'm talking about. That's what I'm trying to kind of get across to you guys so that you understand that this is kind of an explosive energy. And Mars in Libra is very active when it comes to, rights and rights orientation, things like that. And justice and fairness and equality. And, Mars brings the hammer in Libra. And over the course of the next couple of days, it's going to be conjunct my Venus, which is at 24, some of Mars-Venus conjunction. And that'll be interesting too, right, Jasper? Right? Be a water warrior. Anyway, so find out where Libra is in your chart. Find out where Capricorn is in your chart. And then do the math. And if you are looking at trying to handle or channel some very intense energy, you'd be well advised to understand where the energy is emanating and manifesting in your chart. It's not necessarily bad. Like a Mars-Pluto square could be really, really good if you're in a fight for life and death, right? If you're in a street fight with, a couple of criminals, a Mars-Pluto square could really help you out. No, I'm just kidding. They could, though, theoretically. But a Mars-Pluto square could translate into intensity, right? I think under the right conditions, a Mars-Pluto square could also be really good for sex. I should cover Jasper's ears when I say that. Just trying to mine this, try to find, that thing that you can grab from a Mars-Pluto square. It's the tenacity is what it is. It's the tenacity. It's the intensity. It's the deep transformation and finding out how to be fair without throwing a blow, right? Finding out how to manage and manifest liberty and equality without resorting to underhanded or overt violence, one of the two. It's a very intense aspect. Keep your eyes on it in your chart. Keep your eyes on it from the collective as well, because as we all know, things are heating up, and we got to stay cool when things heat up. We just have to do that. Meanwhile, Mars is also getting into a very nice sextile with Jupiter. which is going to expand the idea and the nature of freedom, honesty, integrity, righteousness, and the balancing of the scales, because both these signs are connected to law to some degree. Either number one, the creation or the formation of law, because most law theoretically comes out of quote unquote spiritual law, right? Whether it's, Noahide law or what's the other one? The Islamic law. Most of our laws are derived from either some codification of spiritual or religious law, property law. The criminal code is kind of a descendant of that stuff. But that's what Sagittarius does. It formulates, the law in its broadest, most general concept. And Capricorn determines the law. So they work hand in glove, right? Which is what I've talked about. Capricorn is the judiciary. It is Saturn. What color robes do judges wear? They wear black robes. They are the high priests of Saturn inside of the Hall of Judgments. And without the high priests of Saturn donning their robes and handing down decrees, laws don't really exist. And in fact, in many cases, they would be inert. They would only be concepts and words without the interpretation and the eventual enforcement of those laws. So here we have law in its sort of biggest, broadest sense. And hopefully, going along with law would be this idea of this Sagittarian realm of truth and expansion and freedom. And then we also have Mars coming in, which is Libra, and the scales of justice, which is the activation of the practice of law in a lot of ways to find out what's fair, the representation of both sides, the accuser and the accused and the accuser, right? The accused and the accuser. The accused. You know what I'm talking about. That's the scales of justice, right? So we have Mars and Libra here, and we have the sextile with Jupiter. And this is a time where it can be really activated. So on the one hand, if we can tap into this and stay clear with the intention of Sagittarius, which is being very broad-minded, very, very expansive, dealing with theoretically high principles. And if we stay in this channel, we don't necessarily have to fall prey to this channel, which would be kind of the extreme version of, hey, this isn't fucking fair. And you are the guys that are determining what's fair, and we don't like it. There's another opportunity here that would allow us to have a big picture, right? A really big picture. What does theoretically Libra want people to do? Libra wants people to have win-win. When the scales are balanced, win-win, right, is really what Libra is at its best. So if we can find common ground and win-win while staying with the truth, and this is all within the next 72 hours, this is where this aspect can really hit home. If we try to use this martial force that is jacked into Pluto, it may not necessarily go as well. I think it's a really interesting test in a lot of ways. It's a test to be able to be broad-minded and philosophical and fair without compromising one's position, or without descending into some kind of fitful rage, right? So this could be really interesting to watch over the next 72 hours. Here we have the sun at 11 degrees Scorpio, and it's going to be moving into a closer alignment, getting closer and closer to a trine with Neptune, which is wonderful. And what we have right now is it's going to be a bit wide, but we have a nice grand trine with the true node in Cancer, and we have the sun in Scorpio, which will be at 13 on Tuesday during the election, and getting just a few degrees closer to that trine with Neptune in trine with the true node. We got a grand water trine, which I think could bode very well for our election. And let's hope that the Mercury retrograde has to do with taking the fluoride out, right out. and this would be a really proper application of Mercury retrograde in a water sign. Out. I wanted to talk a little bit about Mercury retrograde and where it went retrograde, which is at 27 degrees Scorpio. And I think Venus was at 29 Scorpio. So they were conjunct, and Mercury was separating, stationing, and now separating, moving backwards. So I began to think about this, and especially with the relationship with Uranus in Taurus. So we're not necessarily talking about Uranus and Taurus, but we're talking about primarily the opposite sign, the antipode of Scorpio, which is the sign of Taurus. And I was thinking about this on Saturday night. Now, when we have a Mercury conjunction with Venus, Venus represents things like our possessions, values, both material values, emotional values to some extent, and how we relate, abundance, fertility, obviously relationships, our relationship to things that we value, money, hard assets, abundance in general. This is where Venus comes into the discussion, right? So when Mercury went retrograde, it was conjunct Venus. So now it's moving backwards. But in that retrograde, right, it is acting as an activator so that we can understand what our relationship is with assets, what our relationship is with things that we value. Because of the opposite sign, we've got to bring that into the discussion. We're talking about Taurus. So we can't have a discussion about Mercury retrograde now in Scorpio without understanding the nature of Taurus and how we perceive, how we relate to, what kind of thought forms that we hold around, guess what? Money, hard assets. Now, this could also play out in the collective. And I'm starting to see more and more chatter, even though we've got this kind of, theater going on about, how many great jobs that are, I wouldn't call them great, how many jobs that are out there, how the Latino community, how the Black community, how they're all rising, all the employment figures are rising for those communities. Well, that's great. That's wonderful. We want people to be somehow engaged in some realm of fruitful employment, so they're not basically robbing and stealing and ripping other people's shit off, right? It's kind of like what's the lesser of two evils, right? Have people having jobs, some of which they may or may not really like, but it allows them to work and trying to figure out who they are so they can get to the next lily pad, or basically saying these jobs are fruitless and worthless, and we'd rather have these people unemployed, in which case things could get really sketchy for them, right? So let's just applaud the jobs for now, and let's hope that whoever has a new job or is working or part of the employment workforce or whatever, they're using that to the best of their ability so that they can manage their lives and take care of the people in their lives, take care of their debt or whatever, right? A lot of times people will get very judgmental around work. We'll say it's all slave wages and it doesn't matter, it doesn't mean anything. And I think it does. I think it does mean something at a certain period of time. And it certainly means something if it affects your mindset. If some people, they're happy when they work. Hey, I've got a job. I'm happy. I'm able to make money. I'm able to pay my bills. And for those people, man, that's really, really important, right? For other people, they're having a job. It may not be the right job. It may be a job that makes them feel crappy or unappreciated. And in which case, that's really important for their mindset. So they've got to be able to move and shift and do something different, meaning they got to find another job or find something that's going to be suitable or workable for them. I went through a period in the 90s where it was really interesting time. That's when Pluto was going through my 12th house. And I hate to say this, but I didn't really work during the 90s. I mean, I did work, but it was not like, I didn't have like a corporate gig. I didn't get up and go to a job every day. I did stuff like, being a telepsychic and tarot reader and, working with music and selling music and kind of being in kind of avant-garde publishing and stuff like that. And I didn't really have a straight job. And it taught me a lot that period of time, because when I would try to get in and try to get into the workforce, everything was very difficult. It felt like I was wearing a straitjacket in some ways. And that was when Uranus was transiting my second house. I had Uranus and Capricorn going through my second house. So I had to find something different. I couldn't find something that was 9 to 5 or run of the mill. And it was a big lesson for me And looking back on that, I learned a lot. So I'm bringing this up because with Mercury retrograde right now, what we're doing is we're looking at our ideas around money, assets, resources, what we do with them, what we do for them, because Mercury is perceptual. Mercury is the pattern that represents how we think during a particular period of time during a transit. When Scorpio, it's about going deep. And as it separates from Venus, we begin to separate ourselves from our attachments around our ideas about the things that connect us to this world. Money, ideas, attitudes around money, physical resources, other people's money, credit. This is a very interesting time in terms of Mercury retrograde separating from those final degrees of Venus, because Scorpio represents other people's money and it represents debt. So I would say over the course of the next 2.5 to 3 weeks, as Mercury continues to go retrograde, I think you're going to hear a lot of discussion around student debt and debt in general. I think that's going to be a really, really big topic of discussion. And how it relates to you is, where are you with money? Where are you with your attitudes and beliefs around money? Where are you with this so-called idea of abundance? Can you be really abundant while at the same time watching your bottom line? I mean, I tend to think for me, money is cyclical. I have it in sort of this kind of tidal. I have a tidal relationship with money. Sometimes I'll have more of it, and then other times it just goes right out again, right? So I'm trying, that's my relationship with it. And so what I try to do is I try not to get stuck. I try not to get stuck in this idea that, well, in this period of time, I don't have a lot, so it determines who I am and determines my worth and my value. And when I have more, it's like I try to understand that also doesn't determine who I am and what my worth and value is based on that as well. It's a very interesting relationship. And I've got Saturn in my second house. And so Saturn, I've lived with Saturn my whole life in the second house. It's been pretty intense, I have to say. And having to deal with like limitations around money. And I got to work. I mean, that's the whole idea with Saturn in the second house is you got to work. And what's really interesting is for me, when I was able to determine the nature of the Sabian symbol that represents where Saturn is in my chart, it actually helped me with my idea around work. So the Sabian symbols, I think, can be really clarifying if you've got some issues in your chart and you want to kind of understand, how you can incorporate something that feels like it can be, like Sisyphus rolling the boulder up the hill every single day, right? So I in these instances, the Sabian symbols can be very, very instructive and enlightening on a personal level. So, but now is a really good time for all of us to look at this Mercury retrograde and to re-examine what our relationship is like with the physical world, physical assets, money, who owes us money, who we owe money to. It could be a time where you may want to look at paying down your debt or figuring out a plan for solvency in some ways with a Mercury retrograde in the opposition to Taurus. Or let's say you're having a downtime or downturn with your finances. How can you realign your mindset? Because mindset is everything. It's everything. And when you have a solid mind, you ever notice that people, like when you do, like I used to do some sales, and if you were in a place where you're doing really, really well with your sales, making other sales was much easier. It's like, oh, I don't have to try, because you get this kind of aura that you don't need the thing. And when people sense that, they're more trusting, they're more open. Oh, this person doesn't need anything from me. Well, let's see what they have, right? But when you get into that hardcore, oh, I got to hit my number. I got to bang, 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 bang. That's when people will put up the resistance because they know that you're getting hung up on what you don't have. And there's a sweet spot in there by being motivated with what you don't have. But by also being in a state where you're much more able to attract people that want to work with you out of wanting to work with you and not based on some level of desperation and need. which is a program that you're running, right? So this is a very interesting time to examine some of those things in our lives. And it's also to be able to look at where you can, put some of your money into places where, I always, sometimes if I'm, if the flow is not as great as it was, right, what I try to do is like, if I go out and I have a meal, I try to leave more for my tip than I normally, like if it's a pretty decent meal and good service, instead of like say 18 to 20%, I might leave 30%. And just to reinforce the fact that number one, I have the money, and number two, it's a way to shift the energy. So I highly recommend during this Mercury retrograde, because again, we're dealing with Scorpio and the very close conjunction with Venus, right? That's where Mercury was and began to separate, that we look at our relationship with money and power, material goods, and the scorpionic kind of need to bring these things into our lives. The Scorpio does represent some level of obsession, and that will probably be fairly insightful or instructive to look at during this time. Now, Venus has moved on. It's in the sign of Sagittarius. And unlike Scorpio, Venus and Sagittarius, like, hey, everybody's got enough, right? It's actually kind of cool. I like Venus and Sagittarius. I think it's a really great placement for Venus because it propitiates generosity and goodwill and abundance. And this is something that we can practice. We can practice goodwill and abundance. And even tomorrow, when you wake up, the moon's probably going to be at about 12 degrees roughly. So it's going to be a wide sextile with Venus, but you'll have the Aquarian moon, which is pretty cool, somewhat detached, very broad, very accepting. I think it's kind of a good way to start the week off with the Aquarian moon. Like, hey, kind of ready for anything. Now the moon will move into square with the sun as the day progresses. And so what we have is this kind of this very broad, emotional mindset, or this very broad kind of emotional template that we're working with in Aquarius. And the sun in Scorpio can be very intense and very exacting. And that's an interesting dynamic, right? Because Scorpio draws us in and the moon in Aquarius wants to detach. So that's going to be a very interesting dance as we start the week, being drawn in and being kind of forced to deal with things in a very head-on Scorpionic way or Scorpionic fashion. And with the moon in Aquarius, it's like, well, I don't want to be bothered. Don't bother me. This is beneath me. This is minor league, right? So the way with the Aquarian moon is to detach. The square will not let you detach. So you have to figure out how to deal with emotionality and instinct in conflict with some degree of objectivity, detachment, and sort of this version of ultimate reason, which sometimes Aquarius. It'll be very interesting. It's a fascinating day to start the week off on. That's for damn sure. And then tomorrow, as Venus gets closer to that third degree, it'll be in the third degree of Sagittarius and moves closer into this inconjunct with Uranus, which is the meeting with unconventional people, or people that might be outside of the circle of people that you normally relate with. And they may just pop into your life. So tomorrow will be a very interesting time. Tomorrow, Tuesday, keep your eyes open for chance encounters where you can learn things from people that you may not think you can learn them from. Because that's the nature of certainly Venus and Sagittarius, which, touches into other cultures, other religions, kind of other classes and castes of people. It's very, very broad. So the inconjunct here would be something that would be very interesting. Like if you're a so-called liberal, guess what? You might meet somebody who could be a conservative, or somebody who may be a libertarian, or somebody who might be sort of grounded in their version of truth, which is different than yours, and you might be able to learn something from them. And if you're a conservative and you're somebody who has this, really locked down mindset that, this is how things are, this is why the country's so fucked up, you may meet somebody outside of that spectrum of influence, and they may bring something to your life which you may think twice about. and you might be able to incorporate. It's a very interesting time for that. Again, this is over the next 48 hours. So keep your eyes open for chance encounters and people that may seem very different than you, um, or vice versa. You may seem very different to them, and you might be able to bring, your particular brand of uniqueness and wisdom and broad and expansive points of view to the discussion. It's a very interesting time as we start the week. That's for damn sure. We still have that Saturn Pluto conjunction. Saturn's getting a little bit closer to Pluto. We've got some sextile action here with Mercury to Pluto, but remember, Mercury's separating, so it's moving away from this. And it will, well, it's going to get closer as it gets back to the 20 degrees, 21, 20. But the idea here is already in play. The idea is already in process, and that's moving and separating away from. So this idea of fixity, because Pluto, even though it's in the sign of Capricorn, is a planet that represents fixity, rules Scorpio. It's a fixed sign. So it's a very interesting time. The image that I have here of this is like prying something away that has been glued to the surface of something for a while, but you can pry it away. But you want the thing. It's not like you want to just discard it. Who would want to pry something apart just to pry something apart, just to watch it become pried apart? Like, you want this thing, but in order to get this thing, you've got to separate it from this thing. So it's like this, you're pulling away. It's like that glue is being pulled apart, right? This is kind of where we're at right now. So you're watching this kind of tension in the glue between these aspects being stretched. And the takeaway literally is the thing that you have in your hand. That thing that you have in your hand is this piece that will allow you to, at some point, when Mercury goes direct, right, reattach itself, but reattach itself in a different way, or reattach itself to something different. So it's an interesting time of separating, detaching, but with a particular kind of focus. It has to do with money, resources, physical, tangible money, physical, tangible resources, your relationship to it, and even to certain people in some ways as well, because of the Venus conjunction with Mercury. All right, let me jump on out of here with the chart of the moment. Let's check in with you guys. We'll jump into a few other charts tonight that I've got lined up here. Let's see where you guys are at, what you're talking about. Politics are very polarized in the UK. It's Mark. It's a plan, right? It's a plan. Like I guess Boris Johnson wears Theresa May's wig at home. Is that right? Having a bit of a falling out with Nigel Farage. Yeah, it's a mess. The UK is a mess right now. Let's see. What do we have here? I plan on going to meet up tomorrow, so we'll likely meet people there I don't typically meet. Oh, good for you, Rob. Good job. And that's really great with Uranus being your ruling planet, right? Good job. Let's see. What else? Does Nance have a pass to Camp David? Oh, Camp David, man. Cloning center, right? You guys know that, right? Camp David. You walk in and then you walk out. The new Nancy seems likable without a personality edge, but way too young to pass. Yeah, interesting. Very interesting take, Paulette. What does Steven say? I have no problem with people taking peon jobs other than welfare, but not when you're been a male actor in paper state. The whole thing with work is really it's tricky, right? It is really, really tricky because it's all about right livelihood. Sometimes right livelihood in a certain moment is just making some fucking money. Sometimes that's just what it's about, so you can stay alive. Or you can use your how do I say this? You can use your skill set and your moxie in order to be self-employed or gainfully employed, which I've done on a number of occasions, and I know people that do. And that takes a whole other kind of relationship with reality and how you value yourself and worth and what's important to you. So, we're going to get some of that, obviously, I think, with Uranus retrograding in Taurus, because Taurus represents value, represents work. It's the things that we do. And Uranus retrograding in Taurus would bring some people very revelatory kinds of experiences around that, and sometimes even shocking in some ways. So anyway, why don't we move on? I wanted to bring up a couple different charts. So the chart that I wanted to jump in with here first is why don't I do the Adi-Da chart first, and then we'll get into Trump. Here we go. Let's do the Adi-Da chart. So let me preface this. If you don't know who Adi-Da is, I'll put a picture up here of him. And so this is Adi-Da, Dalavananda, Da Frijan, Bubba Frijan, originally born Franklin Jones. And what's interesting about this guy is that his life, like when we look at it from our perspective now, he almost looks like he's a program, right? And I'll tell you why. Because, well, I'll read his bio and you'll see why as I get into his bio. But just from a place of physiognomy, today would be his birthday, but he has these Scorpio eyes, right? Those are total Scorpio eyes. And I believe that those are his real Scorpio brows. Can you believe that? But the Scorpio eyes, in many cases, and as I've seen Scorpio eyes, tend to be very narrow. They're very narrow eyes. And you can almost tell that somebody's a Scorpio by that kind of narrow, almost, slitty nature of their eyes. Now, sometimes they will change and they will open up and become more piercing. But the physiological features of a Scorpio with the eyes, these are very reminiscent of Scorpio eyes. And then we have the dark hair and we have the dark eyebrows, right? Now, he's actually a, let's see, I believe this is his rising sign, Sagittarius. I think he's Taurus rising. I have his chart here. Anyway, we're looking at his chart. But this is very clearly, in many ways, very Scorpionic. Now, people that are Scorpio rising have different eyes. They don't have the same kinds of eyes. People that are Scorpio rising tend to have very piercing eyes, very intense eyes, kind of look right through you. Whereas the eyes, the gaze of a Scorpio sun are more shuttered. Okay. So he's got the sort of the shuttered gaze of the Scorpio sun. And of course, a very kind of dark manifestation of Scorpio also, in the hair, the dark hair, the dark brows. And he was not a very tall guy. So he's an interesting cat, and I'm gonna tell you why. So let me bring up let me just read a little bit of his Wikipedia page, and then we're gonna get into his chart because it's a very interesting chart, and again, really tracks the zeitgeist of a certain era. So let me go back in here, and let me just find this thing. One sec. Okay. Oh, it's right here. Come back. All right. So I'll put his image. Let me throw up another image of him. This is when he was a child, and you can kind of tell that there's a distinct knowing here in this face, and he often talks about in his work that he was in touch with something that he called the bright when he was a child, and that he later re-experienced what was called the bright. He was a devotee off and on with Swami Muktananda and his right-hand man, a guy by the name of Rudy. So let me read you a little bit about his life. This is Adi-Da, born Franklin Albert Jones on November 3rd, 1939, Queens, New York, and raised on Long Island. His father was a salesman and his mother was a housewife. A sister, Joanne, was born when he was 8 years old. He served as an acolyte in the Lutheran Church during his adolescence and aspired to be a minister, though after leaving for college in the autumn of 1957, he expressed doubts about the religion to his Lutheran pastor. He graduated in 1961 with a bachelor's degree in philosophy from Columbia University and went on to complete a master's degree in English literature at Stanford in 1963. So he goes to Stanford. What's happening in Stanford in 1963? LSD, Ken Kesey. The LSD experiments that were carried out by the CIA through Stanford, which is the West Wing of the CIA at Stanford. And Ken Kesey was working as a psychiatric nurse at Stanford during that time. And so he was actually working with these people that they were dosing, and he was actually taking the acid himself and bringing it back home. And of course, through Ken Kesey, we have the electric Kool-Aid acid test, the explosion in the 1960s, Ken Kesey being the Western wing of the acid experience on the West Coast, Timothy Leary being on the East Coast and being the Eastern wing of these two very interesting kinds of social experiments, both of which were connected by and to the CIA. So after graduating from Columbia, Adi Da began using a variety of hallucinogenic and other drugs, sometimes heavily. In 1963, after finishing at Stanford for 6 weeks, he was a paid test subject in drug trials of mescaline, LSD, and psilocybin that were conducted at a Veterans Administration hospital in California. So the VA is running these programs. So he's being dosed by the military industrial complex. And the CIA probably being very connected between the VA, the hospital in California, what's happening at Stanford, because they were happening simultaneously. So the Bay Area was a huge cyclotron of psychedelic experimentation. And this is where he gets turned on and switched on. But again, if we were to go back and look at this now, which is what we're doing, we could say, well, this guy was at the effect of some kind of MK Ultra programming, some kind of guru programming. I'll continue here. He wrote later that he found these experiences self-validating and that they mimicked ecstatic states of consciousness from his childhood. He kind of looks like a little baby guru there, doesn't he? He looks like an arrogant little shit, though, too. It's like that. I'm sorry. He just kind of does. He looks like an arrogant little. He's an old soul, though. That's a kid that's an old soul in a lot of ways. You just see it in the face. He later wrote that he found these experiences self-validating and that they mimic ecstatic states of consciousness from his childhood. But problematic as they often resulted in paranoia, anxiety, or disassociation for over a year. Adi Da lived with his girlfriend, Nina Davis, in the hills of Palo Alto, right by Stanford, now in the nape of Silicon Valley. While she worked to support him, he wrote, took drugs, meditated informally, and studied books on Hermeticism in order to make sense of his experiences. Responding to an intuitive impulse, he left California in June of 1964 in search of a spiritual teacher in New York City. Settling in Greenwich Village, Adi Da became a student of Albert Rudolph, also known as Rudy, an Oriental art dealer and self-styled spiritual guru. Having studied a number of spiritual traditions, including the work of G.I. Gurdjieff in Subud. Subud, by the way, is from Indonesia. And it's a very kind of interesting religion based upon the transmission of light. Rudolph was then a follower of Siddha Yoga, founder Swami Muktananda, who gave Rudy the name Swami Rudrananda. Rudy taught an eclectic blend of techniques called Kundalini Yoga, having no literal relationship to the Indian tradition by the same name. Adi Da's father told Rudy of his son's one-time aspiration to become a Lutheran minister. Feeling that he needed better grounding, in 1965, Rudy insisted that he marry Nina, find employment, lose weight, and end his drug use, and begin preparatory studies to enter the seminary. As a student at Philadelphia's Lutheran Theological Seminary in 1967, Adi Da described undergoing a terrifying breakdown Taken to a hospital emergency room, a psychiatrist diagnosed it as an anxiety attack. It was the first in a series of such episodes he would experience throughout his life, each followed by what he explained to be profound awakenings or insight, which is very scorpionic if you think about this. Very scorpionic. So he talks about going through these kinds of descents into the depths of his being and losing his mind, and then reassembling and coming to some kind of greater cohesion or greater understanding. Now, keep in mind, he's gone through stuff at the VA hospital in California, started taking hallucinogenics and psychedelics at Stanford. Who knows what kind of programming that was going on during that time? I'm not even sure he knows. Right? These things just don't happen in a vacuum. They don't just sit there and make notes and take notes and watch you. They interact with you. They feed you things. Right? Then you're tracked. This is how this shit works. All right. So, where are we? It was the first in a series of such episodes he would experience throughout his life, each followed by what he explained to be profound awakenings of insight. Feeling none of his Lutheran professors understood this experience, Adida left and briefly attended St. Vladimir's Russian Orthodox Church or seminary in Tuckahoe, New York. Interesting, huh? I wonder if that's where Brother Nathaniel did his seminary stuff with the Russian Orthodox monks. Anyway, disillusioned, he moved back to New York City and got a job working for Pan American Airlines. In hopes this would facilitate his being able to visit Swami Muktananda's ashram in India. He did so for 4 days in April 1968. Swami Muktananda encouraged Adida to end his studies with Rudy and studied with himself directly. Back in New York, Adida and wife Nina became members and then employees of, get ready, the Church of Scientology. Okay, so this is interesting because number one, let me stop the share here. We did that. Okay, so number one, he goes from the East Coast, goes to the West Coast, gets involved in psychedelic research at Stanford. Then he has another stint at a VA hospital in Northern California. Then he goes off to India to hang out with Muktananda, who steals him from Rudy. And then he joins the Church of Scientology. Again, you know, it's program oriented. L. Ron Hubbard, naval intelligence, Jack Parsons, right? Crowley, the Babylon working, all that stuff. So now he's getting an infusion of this kind of spiritual technology. I'm not sure it lasts that long, but he's in there, right? So following the Scientology protocol, he wrote Rudy a letter severing all contact. After a little more than a year of involvement, Adida left Scientology. He then returned to India for a month-long visit early 1969, during which Swami Muktananda authorized him to initiate others into Siddha Yoga. Okay, so this guy eventually goes to Los Angeles. So in September and October, this is where he has a realization. He was visiting the Vedanta Society Temple in Hollywood, and he permanently realized the bright, which is what he calls his version of spiritual enlightenment. Okay, so it's 1970, it's September, it's October. Let's bring the chart in now. Okay, let me show you his chart. So as an interesting aside to our friend Adida Dalavananda, let's see what this is here. Let me get this other chart. That's it. I used to work at a restaurant in Seattle a long time ago. This is back in 1989. Some of you Seattleites might know the restaurant. It is called Wild Ginger. And I helped open that restaurant. And one of the guys that worked at Wild Ginger was a fellow by the name of David, and or Dave. And Dave and I became friends. And Dave was a very interesting character. He was a devotee of Balavananda, Adidas. And when this is how apparently he got switched on to this being. He was from, I believe, was Akron, Ohio. He was from Akron, Ohio, and he knew Jim Jarmusch and all those dudes, and knew the Devo guys. And uh, he had a dream where Adi Da visited him in his dream and didn't even know who the guy was. So once he saw his picture, he realized that this is the guy that visited him in his dream, and so he had to follow the dream. And so he found him in Clear Lake, California. I'll get into the Clear Lake phase. And he told me that when he got there, it was the most switched on, alive, incredibly ecstatic environment he'd ever experienced. Now, I'm not here to sell the Adidas experience, because there's a lot of other very dark things that emanate from this guy's practice of spirituality, and it really just kind of unfolds into the same kind of, how do I say this, cliche story that a lot of spiritual teachers during the 1970s got trapped in. So let me bring his chart up here. Okay. By the way, this guy David was totally switched on. Like he would be waiting on tables, and he would get into these kind of ecstatic states, and he would have kriyas going through his body while he was waiting on tables, and he would be doing pranayamic breathing through his nose. This guy was very interesting character, but he had a breakdown. He eventually had a breakdown and had to leave the restaurant. Eventually, had to leave Seattle. And not unlike, I think, people that could vibrate at a very high level that find it very difficult to live in the world, which is pretty dense most of the time. All right, here's Adi Da's chart. This is his chart. So he's got Capricorn rising. My bad. Capricorn rising, 11 degrees. Oh, that's where my Saturn is. How about that? Sun in Scorpio at 10 degrees. And here is where, in some ways, he's got a kite pattern. See the kite pattern? It's got a ton of inconjuncts. But in some ways, this is where the theoretical magic is. It is the Venus-Mercury conjunction. Venus at 25 Scorpio, Mercury at 2 Sagittarius. Now, Mercury is camped out here in the 11th house, which is group orientation. This is the transmission of information, wisdom, and knowledge inside of the group setting. And it's not obscured by other planets. Even though there's an ingress with Venus here, it's pretty clear that Mercury is ruling the roost in the 11th house. And we have a grand trine with Mercury right here, right, with Jupiter at the 29th degree of Pisces, which to me does represent some high degree of spiritual knowledge. I mean, it's the freaking last degree of the zodiac. And Jupiter is in Pisces here, which is it's expansive, right? It's like it's the entire playbook with Jupiter and Pisces at 29 degrees, and it's retrograde. So part of what he was probably doing in this lifetime was going back and looking at these various traditions, and particularly with India, because it became kind of this Vedic scholar. So he was this interesting sort of fusion of Vedantism and sort of this Western tradition, and he gets kind of mashed up in this world of crazy wisdom. And this is where the teachings, these kind of very rigid ascetic teachings, kind of take a hard left into this Western tradition of, how do I say this, the immersion of the ego in the experience, because that's what happens. And crazy wisdom is this tradition where the teacher will do things that appear to be outrageous, and they'll tell their students to do things that the students may not be very comfortable with. It's the tradition of the trickster or the Heokaya, and this is what he was doing. This is where his teachings or where his work kind of evolves into, right? So, but here he's got this grand trine with the moon, with Mercury at 2 degrees Sagittarius, that final degree the final degree of the zodiac, Jupiter in Pisces. And then we bring in, guess what? Pluto at 2 degrees Leo. Look at that. It's right there. And then the moon at 29, Cancer, Anaretic Cancer. So he's got a really powerful fucking grand trine. I mean, this guy is connected. He's linked up. It's kind of like when I looked at Rajneesh's chart. He's got a grand fire trine. Like Rajneesh was switched on. It was in his chart. And I do believe that Adi Da wound up kind of going down the path of the avatar as sociopath. He went down the sociopath because this is what happened to him, in my estimation, because there were a ton of lawsuits that came out later. And there were a lot of stories of course, abuse, both sexual, psychological, personal abuse. And it got so bad that he actually had to leave California and move to Fiji. He bought, I believe, he bought the island that Raymond Burr owned. The guy from Ironside, Raymond Burr. Apparently Raymond Burr was not a very good dude. There's a reason why he had that island. Okay. Let's put it that way. So he bought that island so he could have like a community and a world where he could call the shots and be outside of any kind of prosecution or the steely gaze of the law and the authorities, which on some level I understand and could kind of respect in some ways. But again, it's a fine line of being able to do that and have a community that can sort of operate and grow outside of the constant, interactivity with the dominant paradigm. But, are you going to create Shangri-La or are you going to create Jonestown or someplace in between? Right? Most of the times it's kind of someplace in between, but probably tilting towards Jonestown. Anyway, so this is what he did. Now, this is actually a pretty profound chart. He's got his sun on the midheaven. So this is a public figure. This is what happens when you have the sun in the 10th house. He also has a Mars square to his sun. It's a wide square, 10 degrees. Mars is separating. He's got Mars in Aquarius, so he's going to be unconventional. This is going to be an unconventional path, obviously. And he's going to continue to have conflict with who he is. And being that he's a second decan Scorpio, which is going to place it into the Piscean decan, he's not only going to be transforming, but those transformations will be very, very different. Why did he take psychedelics? That's the Piscean decan in my estimation. But also with this kind of hardcore Mars and Aquarius, this is to me this would be something almost tyrannical. It feels tyrannical to me, especially in sort of the within the bounds of a certain community. Like this is a guy that would want to have control, big time control. And Mars and Aquarius would be outside the box. It would challenge convention. First, he'd have to challenge his own convention. Certainly, he would challenge other people's convention. And then he's got a Mars-Uranus square. So he's totally unconventional and very disruptive. And his home life, obviously, would be very well. He created an ashram and he created a community. He created a cult with Uranus in the 4th house. It's actually a really good application for Uranus. Good for you, Adi Da. But this is an intense person. He's got a Pluto. He's got a Mercury trine to Pluto, and look at it, it's almost exact. In fact, holy Christ, it is exact. It's an exact trine. 255, 255. It's the most exact trine I've ever seen in astrology. So there is something here in the chart. He's not I don't think the guy was a charlatan. I think he was actually tapped into something. It's what people do when they're tapped into something. That's always the test of things, isn't it? So he had something going on that, and that anaretic degree of that Cancer moon. That's really interesting. These anaretic degrees, 29, 29, 29, like, last lifetime kind of stuff, right? All high degrees. Saturn, 26, Aries, South Node. Look at that, 29, conjuncting Saturn. This is a very complicated chart. Super complicated. Like, I could talk about this chart for hours. A complicated person, obviously. So one of the things that he did when he created his community is he broke up relationships. If you were married, if you were together, break you up. And then you would wind up being assigned new partners. You'd have to deal with that, right? You'd have to deal with the attachments. And that was the Mars square to the sun in his chart, was breaking up attachments. Of course, at the end of the day, he had 9 wives. So some of those attachments, they got broken up, well, they got reattached to him. It's kind of how it works, doesn't it? Okay, so what I wanted to show you was this chart where he's actually, we get to see where this shift takes place, and it's really fascinating. Let me bring this up here. So what I did is I looked at the transit of Neptune during that September-October period. This is where supposedly, the lights come on and the bright happens. So here's Neptune, and it's right between Venus and Mercury. Neptune, transiting Neptune, is at 28 Scorpio. His natal Venus is at 25 Scorpio. So it's right there at 28 Scorpio. It's right at my ascendant at that time, at 10 years old. Yeah, it was an interesting time. Anyway, during this phase, Mercury, over the course of the next 15 years, would begin to occupy his 11th house. And this is where he would start his spiritual community. This is where his group work would begin. And this is where Neptune would be in the conversation with the grand trine in his chart. So this guy was actually tapped into something. Now you could say, well, of course he was tapped into something. He had the military industrial complex tapping into him. He had the Church of Scientology. I think that these things probably affected him, and he might have been a byproduct of them, perhaps without knowing, or perhaps with some degree of knowing. But then what happens is he creates something completely on his own, and not necessarily. Now, there are people that were deeply influenced by him, like Ken Wilber. Who's this big brain, was really influenced by Adi Dalavananda. But I just wanted to show you sort of these aspects that were happening, like transiting Pluto on his natal Neptune, right? That's heavy. That's really heavy. And it's coming down right into this grand trine, right? It would have been just during that time, during this day, but it's coming into this trine with Uranus in his chart and transiting Saturn, which is right on his natal Uranus, which is trying to ground and being the grounding element for these radical energies that are coming into his chart and into his life. So this is the genesis of where this guy's work begins. And remember, it started off in a certain direction, and then it devolved in a way that unfortunately became all too common and cliche ridden during that time. And I remember reading dispatches in the San Francisco Chronicle, living in the Bay Area, about these experiences with people who had jumped on board the love boat, the Adi-Da love boat, and found out after a period of time that it wasn't all that loving, and that in many cases their lives were completely wrecked and ruined. But being that he had his own domain, he had set up his own version of his 11th house, right? He escaped a number of these lawsuits and allegations that were brought against him, and continued to do his quote unquote work. Now, his high point is during this period of the 70s and then the early 80s. And by the time the early 80s roll around, Neptune has gone all the way through his 11th house and begins the descent into the 12th house. And this is when he begins to think about leaving California and Clear Lake, where they took over an old hot springs there. It's not. It's it was. It's not. I'm spacing out on the. It's not Harbin. It was another one. So again, from the transit of the chart, you can see the chart in action. That he has roughly about a 13, 14-year period where he's creating this spiritual community. And then when things get too hot, Saturn descends into the 12th and then he moves. He literally moves off the mainland, goes all the way to Fiji, out of sight, out of mind. He continued to write books, very prolific author, had a press called Dawn Horse Press. That was his, had Dawn Horse bookstore in LA. But it's an interesting, again, this is particular for that period of time when Neptune is in Sagittarius. And when Neptune is in Sagittarius, there's this profound kind of explosion of spirit and spiritual teachers, some of which wind up sort of graduating and passing the test of time. I know a lot of people who are still students of this guy Miraji, and I've never seen anything really scandalous around Miraji. The guru thing is not my thing. I tried it one time. Not really. I didn't really try it. But it wasn't my thing. I couldn't get there. I couldn't like just throw down with a guru. It's not my style. What's her name? The hugging guru. I went to go see her one time with a bunch of, I lived in California and she had her ashram in California, the hugging guru. What's her name? It's not Guru Mai. That's the descendant. You know what I'm talking about. Anyway, I went there one night because she was in town. You got to go. It's amazing. It's so ecstatic. And so I went there and it was like really crowded and I couldn't find a place to sit. I'm kind of walking around. I'm like, what the fuck am I doing here? Why am I at this place? Why am I here? It is like, I don't know. I was there for about an hour and I was trying to figure out we're literally to fit in. I could not find a place to sit or fit in. And I was looking from the outside in and it was full and there was no room for me. Right. So I'm like, oh, well, I'm going to go back on one of the shuttles. They had all these shuttles. I'm going to go back on the shuttle. I'm just going to go back to my car and head out. So I did. That's about as close as I ever got to something like that, but it was never my thing. And, but for a lot of people it was. What's interesting about Adi Da is that after Frederick Lenz, who was another student of Muktananda, after Frederick Lenz, who had quite a following, by the way, after he committed suicide and died, his students went into Adi Da's world and became a part of his community. I don't understand this pull and this attraction. I don't get it. My first wife was very into gurus, totally into gurus. I think that's why she married me. No, I'm just kidding. I think I was trying to break her the habit, actually. Or maybe I chased her the gurus. I don't know. But she was very into gurus. And I love her to death. I haven't spoken to her in years. But she wound up going to Hawaii. And I'll never forget this moment, right? I hadn't talked to her in a long time. She's actually a really cool person. And there's this guy named Bill Nastelli. And he wrote a book about mermaids. And it's like this whole kind of, sort of magical treatise. I had Bill on my show many years ago. And he's a student of the magician, France Bardon. So he practices sigil magic. That's what he does. And he also courts mermaids. So he has a whole series of posts about mermaids. And a website devoted to mermaids. So all these beautiful women wash upon the shore of his place in Hawaii and love to be photographed kind of glistening very close to the tropical foam of the sea that they've just emerged from, right? So one day, I got an email from a friend of mine who actually published Bill Mastelli's book. And he's there, he's having dinner with Bill Mastelli, and there's my ex-wife sitting at the table. I'm like, what is she doing there? Oh, I know. She's now she's a mermaid, and Bill is the mermaid guru, right? So it's a weird world, right? It's a totally weird world. So she wasn't really able to shake the guru thing. Um, just took on a different form, and she had some very difficult experiences. I don't know anybody that hasn't had a difficult experience with the guru. I mean, it's like, I think it's just bound to fail. Just bound to fail. I think, I think it's one of the worst things that anybody could ever do, to be honest with you. And it's like when I was doing a lot of tarot reading back in the '90s, and I was kind of living out a past life, like some kind of a life of a sadhu and a mendicant, and I literally was in my van, and I would just go to some place and I throw my cards, and I'd make $25 or $200, whatever. I was kind of this wandering, nomadic, kind of sage-like. I wasn't monk-like now, but sage-like person during that journey. And during that time, I thought to myself, all I really want to do is just, I really want to do is to live somewhere, and some people come visit me, they can sit down, I can talk to them, and I can tell them, things about themselves, and they can leave me a bowl of rice, or they can leave me a bowl of money, it doesn't matter, and they can just leave, right? For a while, I was kind of really affixed to this idea. This was my idea of a life that I would really feel very comfortable living in some ways. And then, of course, my journey it still kind of has unfolded in that way. Somewhere. What happened? I'll get an audience. Down, fail. Letting people down. Wow, shit. Oh, I get it now. It's just me. I'm just sure. Yes. Wow. He died. Died. And in many cases, started on horror. I was shocked about it. And Baker, the guy who started Source Family God, they were all shocked. Thought he was going to be the father forever. This is what happens. All the great spiritual teachers. Anyway, it's another interesting character from another very interesting period of time. That Neptune and Sagittarius transits really switched on, gave people a very interesting peek into a spiritual dimension that I believe was very real. Right? And what happened as a result of the contact with that kind of the movement away, right? The removing of the veil with Neptune and Sagittarius, the thinning of that spiritual veil. What happened during that time is really a very important part of the history of this country in the world and the planet, because a lot of people have been influenced deeply by that period of time and still are in a lot of ways. And I guess the Jupiter and Sagittarius have been, spend a lot of time talking audio bad. Okay. All right, so I got to do something different with the audio. So hold on one second. I'll getting some clarity here. Hold on. Testing 1, 2, 3. Oh, I can see why it's bad. Yes. Let's see. Let's do this. Let's do. Hold on. Let's do this. Testing 1, 2. Is that better now? Is that better now, boys and girls? Sorry about that. I'm having some issues come up with my line in on my computer. I apologize for that. All right, let's do one more chart. Let's do one more chart. Here we go. This is the follow-up of the Trump chart that we started and worked on last week. Okay. That's not it. Oh, just love Mercury retrograde. Okay, so let me give you some context. So after last week, I was thinking about Mercury retrograde, obviously, and I was thinking about, well, more than that. I was thinking about Trump and the chart that we pulled up for the French Revolution, right? And what triggered it was that degree of algol right on his midheaven, in decapitation, the picture with Kathy Griffin holding his decapitated head, and then thinking about the French Revolution and thinking about why so many people had a lot of antipathy and anger, and I tried to find some links between his chart and the French Revolution, which were kind of interesting. Then I began to think about the relationship with him and Louis XVI. Of course, Louis XVI, who was the king of France during that time, the Jacobin Revolution, Marie Antoinette, all that stuff, was the guy who ultimately gets beheaded. You know, he's living in Versailles. He is the Sun King. That's what they called him. Louis XVI was the Sun King. And he was removed from Versailles to Paris, where he was executed by the guillotine machine. So I thought, well, perhaps there's an interesting astrological connection between Donald Trump and Louis XVI. And so I ran their charts, and this is what I got. Oh, that's Adida. Pardon me. It's right here. Okay, so here we go. Here is Trump right here, center ring, right? Here we have the Sun-Uranus conjunction, the trademark of his chart, true node in Gemini. You know, and I was watching him. He just did this this speech. It was in Mississippi. It was on Friday, and one of the things that that speech really reinforced to me is Trump is really fucking funny. Like, he's funny. He's almost like a stand-up comedian. You know, he's almost like a stand-up comedian performance artist who is playing the role of president. And I began to think about that Sun-Uranus conjunction and how Uranus and Aquarius, not Uranus and Aquarius, but Uranus and Aquarius, is connected to the Fool, the idea of the Fool. What do we have here? What do we have? Did you change? Yes. Hold on. Hold on. Sorry.
Mercury retrograde moment. But Aquarius is connected to the Fool. It's connected to the Fool. When you look at the Fool in the Tarot card, it is the 0 card. It is also the 22nd card in the major arcana, right? We go to the 21st card, which is the world or the universe. The 22nd card is the ending and the beginning. It's the Fool. The Fool is the Alpha and the Omega and is often associated with Uranus because the Fool is, anything can happen, right? It's a very Uranian kind of perspective, very Uranian kind of energy, like what me worry. And when you look at Trump with the Sun-Uranus conjunction and you look at his face, sometimes he looks like the Joker in the playing card deck. He looks like the Joker. He has the face of a Joker. He has the face of a fool. And you can see this in his chart with the Sun-Uranus conjunction. It really came through when I was watching him the other night in Mississippi. Anyway, so we know that that's his chart. On the outer part of the chart is the chart. The outer ring is Louis XVI's chart. We have his birth time, so we know his chart. And he was born on August 28th, 1754. And on August 28th, obviously, he's into the sign of Virgo. He's 4 degrees into the sign of Virgo. He also happens to have Jupiter, and his Jupiter in his chart is right on 0 degrees, which is where Regulus is now. And when Trump was elected president, Regulus was just off his ascendant in the sign of Virgo. And of course, we did this progressed chart with him last week, and his progressed sun, I believe it's progressed moon, and his progressed sun are right around 2 to 3 Virgo. So they're conjunct Regulus. So Louis XVI, his Jupiter at 0 Virgo is now conjunct Regulus. It was conjunct Regulus then, but it's much closer now. So he also had Mercury in the sign of Leo, and that's at 26 degrees. And it conjuncts Trump's Mars at 26 degrees, right? And what is Mercury doing? Mercury is moving backwards. It's retrograding. And what is Mercury? Mercury is thought. Mercury is journey. Mercury is travel. And where is it traveling to? It's traveling into the 12th house, Trump's 12th house, the past. And we have Jupiter right here, right freaking here, right on Regulus, right on Trump's ascendant. And we have the sun of Louis XVI right on Trump's ascendant as well. One theoretically could make an astrological case that Trump is the reincarnation of Louis XVI. Hence, Algol on the midheaven. It's all right there. It's all right on the ascendant. And look at Mercury, Mars. Exact degree. And Mercury moving backwards. Now here's Neptune in Leo, also in Trump's 12th house, conjunct his natal Pluto. Are there other markers? Perhaps there are. Why don't we explore them? How about here? We've got the true node in Libra, and there's Venus in Libra. So Louis had a Venus true node conjunction in the sign of Libra. Down in Trump's 2nd house, resources, money, bit of a wide conjunction with Neptune with that true node. Neptune being very fluid, of course, and a Venus conjunction with Jupiter. So Louis' Venus is at 12. Trump's Jupiter is at 17. So we have a conjunction. You know who I think Marie Antoinette was? Ivanka. I think Ivanka was Marie Antoinette. My 2 cents. That's my 2 cents. Because here we have Juno, the Marian maiden. And I believe Ivanka also has Jupiter in Libra as well. And I'll bet you it's right around the Marian maiden down here in Trump's chart and his Venus. Oh, and look at this. Juno here as well. Oh, check that out. So Juno is at 22 Libra, right there. So both Trump and Louis XVI have Juno and Libra. Interesting, very interesting. And then that true node conjunction. So, and then, you know, past life, what do we have? We have the south node in Aries. That would be in Trump's 8th house, which is the house of death. It's also the house of legacies in some ways, right? And what does Aries represent? The head. The head. And what did he do with the south node in Aries? Kaput. He lost his freaking head. It's exactly what happened. And he's got this south node in Trump's chart. Very interesting. Also, another fascinating kind of point is the vertex right on Trump's descendant, right? So the descendant is in many ways how the world sees us, right? It's how the world sees us. You know, with the ascendant, it's how we see the world or how we interact with the world. The descendant is how the world sees us in many ways. So with Trump, with Pisces on the descendant, well, the world sees him in very Piscean terms. He's a scapegoat. They want to hang him. They want to crucify him. They want to decapitate him, which is exactly what they did with Louis XVI. And there's that vertex. It's the second ascendant, right? So the second ascendant of the chart is right on Trump's descendant and right near his part of fortune. Interesting stuff. Very interesting. So he's got a relationship with Louis XVI and the same relationship in many ways as perhaps how the world saw Louis XVI. I'm going to cut his fucking head off. And I believe that's what they want to do with Trump as well. No doubt. So there's another interesting marker here. Very, very interesting marker. So then we have Pallas in the 5th house of Trump, and here's Saturn, right? This is Louis XVI. Saturn is in Capricorn. Want to throw some transits in there? Where's his Saturn? His Saturn's at 11 Capricorn. That's another number. That was the same number, the same degree as Adi Da's ascendant. Is that interesting? What else happens to be the degree of my Saturn? So interesting stuff, right? Because Pluto and the South Node is right at, what is it, 10 degrees right now. So it's right on Louis XVI Saturn in the 5th house. Very interesting. Very, very interesting stuff. And then Louis' moon is at 14, so moon Saturn conjunction. This guy had a hard time with his emotions, didn't he? Then we have Chiron, which is in Sagittarius, conjuncting Trump's South Node, which is the past, right? And Chiron in Sagittarius, or Chiron, or Sagittarius in general, dealing with countries, foreign countries, international treaties, all that Sagittarian stuff. It's right there. Chiron conjuncting his moon, which is the home, perhaps a home from another place and another time, and also the Achilles heel of his chart. Women, Achilles heel of his chart. Happened. So Chiron from Louis right there, and then in Louis' chart, Pluto is on his IC, which is very intense if you think about it, because he was taken out of his home, right? He was taken out of his home, and ultimately he was murdered. So there's some very, very interesting factors here. And I haven't even got into the inconjuncts, like the inconjunct with Saturn and Pluto or Neptune. It's an inconjunct with Saturn and Neptune in his chart. Again, I could probably spend another 45 minutes to an hour, but the really key factors here that have me thinking that Trump is a reincarnation of Louis XVI is right here on the ascendant. Jupiter and the sun, Jupiter really conjunct the ascendant, Jupiter 0 Regulus, which is really where Trump's progressed sun is right now. Mercury conjunct his natal Mars, retrograding into the 12th house, which is sort of the pre-historical moment of Donald Trump, right? We come in through the ascendant, and then we go all the way around the chart and we leave into the 12th house. We'll leave through the 12th house. So the 12th house is prehistorical. It's like the part of our being before we take our first breath. And that's when our theoretical history and time begins. Very interesting. And maybe next week we'll continue to do this, and I'll bring Ivanka into this. And we'll check out Ivanka right around here, which would maybe coincide with my theory that Ivanka was Marie Antoinette. Okay, I think I'm gonna get on out of here. Thanks for putting up with the audio. I may have to get a new computer. These things happen sometimes. Okay, let me see where you guys are in chat. Where are you at, chat? Let's see. Louis, oh baby. Is there a synastry comparison? Let's see what else. I stepped for a moment. Is Trump? Yes, I believe so. Yes. Louis the 16th, right? Louis the 16th. I thought he was a reincarnation of Patton. Well, maybe. I'd have to look at the chart. Patton's a Leo, right? So I'd have to look at Patton's chart. Patton was a firm believer in reincarnation. I guess he could have more than one. Let's see, Judy saying goodnight. People are falling off. Okay. When he fires Bret Michaels on The Apprentice, it's just amazing. He's both king and jester. Absolutely. He is the king and the fool. Absolutely. All right. Sorry about the sound, people. I appreciate it. Oh, Libra. What did Patton have? You're right, he was a Libra. What did Patton have in Leo? He had something in Leo. I forget. Thank you, Arpantes, for the clarification. All right, I'm going to get on out of here. I apologize for the distortion, disruption of the audio. I'm going to have to break out a new computer. Thank you once again. If you like what I do here, hit that little like button. Subscribe, tell your friends. I do readings. You can reach me at robertphoenix.com. And I will be probably doing something on Tuesday, try to do some live streaming of during the election here in Fredericksburg. Say a little prayer for us. Let's stop the fluoride in Fredericksburg. Let's stop the fluoride in America. Let's reclaim our pineal glands. Let's protect our thyroids. Let's keep our children as smart as they possibly can be. So let the wave begin here and let it flow all the way across. I already started in San Marcos and Buda and Kyle. Let it flow all the way through Fredericksburg and just keep on flowing until it gets all the way to California, and then have it wash back again. Let's have a fluoride-free America, and let's have a fluoride-free world, and let's have a really good week. I'm Robert Phoenix. Use your head to discern what's real, your heart to stay when it's possible, and I'll see you guys on Tuesday, 15 Minutes of Flame from Election Central right here in Fredericksburg. Good night.